The desert does not speak loudly. It never has. Its voice moves slowly through stone, through wind-worn canyons, through shadows that stretch long at sunset. If you stand still among the mesas of the American Southwest, where red rock walls rise like ancient temples and the sky opens endlessly above, you may feel it. A quiet presence. A sense that something once lived here, not fleeting, not small, but deeply rooted in the land itself. This is the land once shaped by the Anasazi. A people who built cities into cliffs, who measured time by the sun and stars, who farmed the desert with patience rather than force. And then they were gone. No great battlefield, no burned cities, no written farewell. Only empty stone dwellings, silent kivas, and footpaths that end without destination. Tonight, we begin a slow journey not to solve their mystery, but to walk gently alongside it. And as the desert wind moves softly through broken doorways, we listen. The land before silence, long before borders, highways, or names on maps, the Four Corners region was already ancient. Here, where modern Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah meet, the land rises and folds into itself, a vast plateau cut by time and erosion. Sandstone cliffs glow amber at dawn. Canyons twist like patient rivers frozen in stone. Juniper and piñon trees cling to thin soil, their roots learning the art of survival. To outsiders, this land appears harsh. But to the Anasazi, also known today as the ancestral Pueblones, it was home. They arrived here slowly over generations as hunter-gatherers who learned the rhythms of the seasons. Rain was rare, so every drop mattered, and instead of bending the land to their will, they learned to listen to it. A civilization that grew quietly, the Anasazi did not rise suddenly. There were no empires announced by conquest, no kings carving their names into monuments. Instead, their civilization unfolded gradually, like a story whispered from parent to child. By around 100 BCE, small farming communities had begun to appear. They planted maize, corn, along with beans and squash, the three sisters that nourished body and soil alike. Homes were first simple pit houses, partially underground, warm in winter, cool in summer. But over centuries, something remarkable happened. Their villages grew. Their architecture evolved. Their understanding of astronomy, agriculture, and stone deepened. By 900 CE, the Anasazi were building some of the most extraordinary structures in North America. Cities in stone and sky in places like Mesa Verde, Chaco Canyon, and Canyon de Chelly. Entire communities were carved into cliffsides, not temporary shelters, not hiding places, but permanent intentional cities. Multi-story dwellings with dozens, sometimes hundreds of rooms, doorways aligned with solstices. Walls fitted so precisely that a blade of grass cannot pass between stones. And at the heart of many settlements lay the kiva, a circular, subterranean ceremonial chamber. Descending into a kiva was symbolic, a return to the earth, a reminder of emergence, the belief that people once rose from the world below. These were not chaotic spaces. They were carefully planned, especially in Chaco Canyon. Chaco Canyon, a center without a throne. Chaco Canyon, in present-day New Mexico, is wide, open, and strangely quiet. Here, massive stone complexes called Great Houses were constructed between 850 and 1150 CE. Pueblo Bonito alone contained over 600 rooms. Roads, straight, wide, deliberate, extended outward for miles, connecting distant communities. Some of these roads ignore terrain entirely, cutting straight across mesas and canyons as if guided by something beyond practicality. Were they trade routes, ceremonial paths, symbolic lines drawn upon the land? No one knows for certain. What we do know is that Chaco was not merely a city. It was a center, a gathering place, a heartbeat. And then that heartbeat faded. Signs of change in the wind. By the late 1100s, subtle changes began to appear. Tree ring data, nature's quiet record, reveals long periods of drought. Not sudden catastrophe, but years without dependable rain. Crops would have failed slowly, harvests grown uncertain. Communities forced to adapt again and again, but drought alone does not explain everything, because the Anasazi were resilient. They had survived dry periods before. Something else was shifting, socially, spiritually, perhaps politically. Construction slowed. Great houses were no longer maintained. Some villages were abandoned, others fortified. Yet still there is no evidence of widespread war. No mass graves, no cities burned in panic, just movement. The leaving that left no goodbye. Between 1275 and 1300 CE, something extraordinary occurred. Across the region, Anasazi settlements were gradually emptied. Cliff dwellings that had sheltered generations were left behind. Cooking pots remained. Tools were set down. In some places, doorways were sealed, as if intentionally closed. In others, walls were dismantled stone by stone. This was not flight, it was departure. But to where, and why all at once? Echoes in modern Pueblo memory. The Anasazi did not vanish into nothing. Modern Pueblo peoples, including the Hopi, Zuni, and others, trace their ancestry directly to them. In oral histories, the departure is remembered not as collapse, but as migration. A journey guided by spiritual instruction. A movement toward balance. Some stories speak of the land becoming out of harmony. Others describe a need to fulfill sacred paths. These accounts are not framed as tragedy. They are framed as continuation. Still, even these traditions do not map neatly onto archaeology. They leave space for mystery. A quiet question that remains when the last Anasazi families walked away from their cliffside homes. The desert did not resist. It simply watched. Wind passed through empty rooms. Stars continued their ancient paths overhead. And over centuries, sand and silence settled in. What remains today is not a riddle demanding an answer, but a presence inviting reflection. And as we pause here at the edge of their story, we prepare to walk deeper into their world, because the stones have more to say. And so, as the echoes of the ancient world softened into the night, the desert held its breath, waiting for us to listen once more. A gentle return. The night passes slowly over the high desert. Stars drift without urgency. The fire at the center of the village settles into glowing embers, and with the coming of dawn, the stone walls begin to warm once more. To understand why the Anasazi left, we must first understand how they lived. Not through dates alone, nor through broken pottery and fallen walls, but through the quiet rhythms of daily life. Because the Anasazi did not merely survive the desert. They entered into a relationship with it. And like all relationships shaped by time, it required patience, listening, and respect. Mourning in a cliff dwelling. Imagine a morning in Mesa Verde, sometime in the early 1200s. The sun rises slowly, its light spilling across the canyon walls until it reaches the cliff dwellings tucked beneath natural overhangs. Smoke curls gently from small hearths. Footsteps echo softly against stone floors. A child carries water in a clay vessel, careful not to spill what took effort to collect. These homes are cool in summer, protected in winter, and always shaped to the land, never imposed upon it. Rooms are small but purposeful. Sleeping spaces, storage areas, corn cobs stacked neatly against walls. Nothing here is excessive, nothing wasted. In a world where rain is uncertain, efficiency becomes wisdom. Farming the unforgiving earth, the Anasazi were farmers in a place that seemed unwilling to be farmed. There were no wide rivers nearby, no steady rainfall. Instead, they practiced dry farming, a method that relies on timing, soil knowledge, and an intimate understanding of seasonal patterns. They planted crops where rainwater naturally pooled, along gentle slopes, at the base of mesas, in small, carefully prepared plots. Stone-check dams slowed runoff, terraces held precious soil in place, mulch reduced evaporation. Corn was central not just as food, but as a symbol of life itself. Beans restored nutrients to the soil. Squash spread wide leaves, protecting moisture beneath. This system did not dominate the land, it cooperated with it, and for centuries it worked. Food as ritual, not resource meals, were not rushed affairs. Food carried meaning beyond hunger. Corn was ground slowly on stone manos, the rhythmic sound echoing like a heartbeat through villages. Cooking took time. Patience was built into the process. Sharing food reinforced bonds. No household existed in isolation. And when harvests were good, surplus was stored, not flaunted. When harvests were poor, sharing became survival. This was a culture that understood balance long before the word existed. The Kiva, entering the world below as the sun climbed higher, attention often turned inward toward the spiritual heart of the community. The Kiva, circular, subterranean, entered by ladder through the roof. Descending into a Kiva was not simply moving into a room. It was symbolic. Many Pueblo traditions speak of emergence, of ancestors rising from a world beneath the earth. To gather in the Kiva was to return briefly to that origin. Inside, voices softened. Firelight flickered against plastered walls. Stories were told, not to entertain, but to remember. Ceremonies aligned with seasons, with planting, with rain, with the movement of the sun and stars. Spiritual life was not separate from daily life. It was woven into it. Reading the sky, the Anasazi were careful observers. They watched the sky with the same attention they gave to soil and stone. At Chaco Canyon, buildings aligned precisely with solar events. On the summer solstice, light passes through narrow openings to strike specific markings. On the winter solstice, shadows fall in deliberate patterns. These were not accidents. They marked time. Guided planting and harvest, anchored ceremonies to cosmic rhythms. In a land where seasons could mean survival or scarcity, knowing when mattered as much as knowing how. Trade without empire. Despite their remote environment, the Anasazi were not isolated. Archaeological finds reveal turquoise from distant mines, macaw feathers from Mesoamerica, shells from the Pacific coast. These items moved along vast trade networks, not enforced by armies but maintained by relationships. Trade was slow, intentional. Objects carried stories, not just value. This network connected the Anasazi to a larger world, one they participated in quietly without seeking dominance. Children of the community, children learned by watching. There were no formal classrooms, no rigid instruction. Skills were passed hand to hand, story to story. A child learned farming by walking beside elders, learned pottery by shaping clay slowly, learned respect by observing restraint. Knowledge was not hoarded, it was shared. because survival depended on continuity. Time measured differently. The Anasazi did not measure life by urgency. There was no obsession with speed. Projects spanned generations. Walls were built knowing others would finish them. Roads stretched beyond immediate need. This was a culture that thought forward without rushing. And perhaps that is why their departure feels so puzzling. Because nothing about their life suggests sudden collapse. Subtle shifts, yet beneath the calm rhythm, small tensions may have grown. Population increased. Resources were stretched thinner. Rain became less reliable. Social structures may have evolved. Beliefs adapted or were challenged. These changes do not announce themselves loudly in stone. They appear as quiet patterns, as pauses in construction, as choices made gradually. And slowly, life began to reorient. A pause before the journey. As evening returns to the canyon, shadows once again claim the cliff dwellings. The fire is lit, voices lower, stars emerge. Nothing feels dramatic, nothing feels final. And yet movement is beginning, not away from life, but toward another chapter. One guided by memory, by belief, and by the quiet instruction of the land itself. And so, as the wind traced familiar paths through familiar stone, the Anasazi prepared not in fear but in understanding. A slow arrival approaching Chaco Canyon feels different from entering other ancient places. There is no sense of spectacle, no dramatic rise, no towering cliffs announcing importance. Instead, the land opens quietly. A wide, shallow basin, low mesas resting beneath an immense sky. At first glance, it appears ordinary, even empty. And yet the longer one stands here, the more the silence feels deliberate. As if the canyon itself was chosen not for what it displayed, but for what it allowed. Space, alignment, stillness. Here the Anasazi built something that was never meant to dominate the land, only to speak with it. A center without walls. Chaco Canyon was not fortified. There were no defensive towers, no enclosing walls. This alone sets it apart. In a world where many civilizations protected power through barriers, Chaco remained open. It did not command obedience, it invited participation. People came here from distant regions, walking roads that crossed deserts, mesas, and canyons. They did not come for conquest, they came to gather. Why? That question lingers in every stone. The great houses, the structures of Chaco Canyon are known today as great houses. Massive, multi-storied complexes built with astonishing precision. Pueblo Bonito, Chetro Kettle, Casa Rinconada. Their walls are thick, their rooms numerous, but something unusual stands out. Many rooms show no signs of daily living, no hearths, no grinding stones, no domestic debris. These were not simply homes, they were places of purpose, perhaps administrative, ceremonial, or symbolic. Their scale suggests coordination. Their design suggests planning, but their function remains elusive. Geometry written in stone measurements within Chaco Canyon reveal an unexpected pattern. Buildings align not only with the sun, but with lunar cycles. The moon's 18.6-year standstill, a rare and complex astronomical event, is reflected in architectural alignments. To observe this cycle requires decades of careful observation. It suggests a knowledge passed across generations, a patience deeply embedded in culture. This was not casual astronomy. It was intentional. Chaco was in many ways a calendar made of stone. The roads that defy logic extending outward from Chaco are roads unlike any others in the ancient world. They are wide, straight, relentless, Some stretch for miles without bending around obstacles. They climb mesas directly, descend cliffs without switchbacks. From above, they appear almost symbolic, as if drawn with purpose rather than practicality. Some lead to distant communities, others lead to empty horizons, and some simply end. Why build a road that goes nowhere? This question has troubled archaeologists for decades. More than trade routes, if these roads were purely practical, they would curve with the land. But they do not. Their straightness suggests intention beyond efficiency. Some researchers propose they were ceremonial paths, routes walked during seasonal gatherings, paths that reinforced connection rather than commerce. Others suggest they were lines of sight, aligning distant landmarks with celestial events. Still others believe the roads themselves were symbols, marks upon the land declaring belonging, direction, and meaning. Perhaps they were all of these at once. A network without hierarchy, what makes Chaco remarkable is not just its complexity, but its restraint. There is little evidence of a ruling elite living in luxury. No grand tombs, no hoarded wealth. Power here, if it existed, was distributed rather than centralized. Authority may have flowed through ritual, through shared belief, through participation. This kind of system is fragile, but also flexible. It adapts, it moves, and perhaps when the time came, it let go. The people who passed through Chaco Canyon was likely seasonal, a place of gathering, not permanent residence. People arrived during important times, solstices, ceremonies, communal decisions. They brought goods, stories, songs, then they returned home. In this way, Chaco was less a city and more a heartbeat, a rhythm that pulsed across the desert, and like all rhythms, it could change. Signs of quiet withdrawal. By the mid-1100s, activity at Chaco slowed. Maintenance declined. New construction ceased. Roads were no longer kept clear, but again, no destruction, no violence, just a gentle fading, as if the purpose of the place had been fulfilled or transformed. Meaning beyond stone, perhaps Chaco Canyon was never meant to last forever. Perhaps its value lay in alignment, not permanence. Alignment with the sky, with the seasons, with collective intention. When that alignment shifted, the people shifted with it, leaving behind a map not of power, but of understanding. The canyon at dusk, as the sun lowers over Chaco, shadows stretch across the great houses. The walls glow briefly, then dim. Wind moves softly through doorways that once framed movement and meaning, and the canyon rests, not abandoned, not forgot, simply quiet. And so, as the geometry of intention settled back into stone and starlight, the roads waited, patient, straight, and unanswered. A different kind of crisis. Not all endings arrive with noise. Some come softly, through seasons that feel almost normal, through skies that promise rain and deliver only wind. For the Anasazi, change did not announce itself with catastrophe. It unfolded gradually, year by year, cloud by cloud. To understand this chapter of their story, we must listen not to ruins, but to the land itself. Because the desert remembers. The language of tree rings long after people leave. Trees remain. In the high plateaus of the Southwest, ancient junipers and pines carry a quiet record within them. Each year a ring is formed. Wide rings speak of moisture and abundance. Narrow rings whisper of drought. By reading these patterns, scientists have reconstructed centuries of climate history. What they found is not sudden disaster, but a sequence of long, tightening pauses. Beginning in the late 1100s, rainfall became unreliable, not absent, just inconsistent. Years of scarcity followed by brief recovery. Hope followed by disappointment. For dry farming societies, this uncertainty matters more than absolute lack. The fragility of balance, the Anasazi agricultural system was carefully balanced. It depended on timing, on soil moisture, on the cooperation of weather. A single failed harvest could be endured, two could be managed, but repeated uncertainty erodes confidence. Stored food dwindles, planning becomes cautious. Communities reassess where and how they live. These are not dramatic moments. They are thoughtful ones. Decisions made around fires, spoken softly, guided by memory rather than fear. Population and pressure. By the 1200s, Anasazi populations had grown. Villages were larger, fields more numerous. Even a sustainable system can strain under growth when resources tighten. Water sources became contested not through war but through necessity. Paths crossed more often. Hunting grounds overlapped. Evidence suggests some communities moved closer together, seeking cooperation. Others dispersed, searching for better conditions. Both responses reveal adaptation, not collapse. Soil, wind, and patience. Extended drought affects more than crops. Without consistent moisture, soil loosens. Wind carries it away. Terraced fields, once fertile, thin slowly. This process is invisible day to day, but over decades it reshapes possibility. Farmers adjust planting locations. They shorten growing cycles. They diversify strategies, but even the most patient system has limits. And recognizing those limits is not failure, it is wisdom. Signs in the stone archaeology reveal subtle clues. In later settlements, homes become smaller. Construction quality changes, not poorer but quicker. Some ceremonial spaces are repurposed. These are not signs of panic. They are signs of transition. A society turning its attention from permanence toward movement. Drought and belief. In many traditional cultures, environmental change is not viewed purely as physical. It is spiritual. Drought may signal imbalance, a need to realign behavior, ritual, or location. Modern Pueblo oral histories often describe environmental shifts as messages rather than punishments. Messages calling for migration, for renewal, for the continuation of sacred journeys. Seen this way, leaving is not abandonment. It is obedience to tradition, to belief, to the land's instruction. Not all regions suffered equally importantly. Drought was not uniform. Some areas remained viable longer. Others became increasingly difficult. This unevenness explains why abandonment occurred in waves, not all at once. Some communities lingered, others moved early. This mosaic of departure creates the impression of mystery, but within it lies logic, the logic of adaptation. The slow decision to move, leaving a home carved into stone, is not a light choice. It requires consensus, preparation, ritual closure, doorways sealed, sacred objects carried forward, paths remembered. Migration among the Anasazi was not escape. It was continuation. The people did not see themselves as ending. They saw themselves as moving within a longer story. The sky remains as drought cycles continued. The sky did not change its rhythms. Stars still rose, solstices still arrived. And perhaps this constancy offered reassurance, that while places shift, patterns endure, and people, when attentive, can endure with them. A quiet threshold standing at this moment in time. We find no single cause, no singular failure. Instead, a convergence, climate, population, belief, choice, each gently nudging the Anasazi toward motion. And so, as the rains grew quieter and the land spoke more softly, the people listened and prepared to follow. Movement without urgency, the Anasazi did not leave in a single season. There was no final sunrise, no last look taken in haste. Instead, movement unfolded gradually, family by family, village by village. Some stayed longer, some departed early. But all shared a common understanding. That movement itself was not loss. It was part of the design, migration in ancestral thought to the Anasazi and to their Pueblo descendants. Migration is not an emergency response. It is a sacred process. Oral traditions describe humanity as emerging into this world, then traveling across it, learning through each place. Settlements are chapters, not conclusions. Staying too long can be as dangerous as leaving too soon. This worldview changes everything. It reframes abandonment as fulfillment, leaving without erasing one of the most striking features of Anasazi departure is what they chose to leave behind. Homes were not destroyed. Ceremonial spaces were not defiled. Instead, doorways were sealed. Walls were repaired, not broken. This suggests closure, a respectful farewell. Like closing a book knowing it will not be forgotten. They left places intact because they believed the land would remember. The sacred geography migration routes were not random. They followed what can be described as a sacred geography. Mountains, springs, rivers, and distinctive rock formations served as markers. Each location held meaning. Each stop offered instruction. These journeys were likely accompanied by ceremony, songs marking arrival, stories anchoring memory. Movement was slow, intentional, not fleeing but fulfilling. The role of the roads, those straight Chaco roads, take on new meaning here. Perhaps they were not meant for daily traffic. Perhaps they were ceremonial corridors, pathways walked during significant transitions. They may have symbolized direction, connection, and continuity. Even if not physically used during migration, they may have shaped the idea of it. Movement as structure, movement as meaning. Carrying knowledge forward, the Anasazi did not leave empty-handed. They carried seeds, both literal and symbolic, agricultural knowledge, architectural principles, ceremonial practices. As communities resettled, these traditions adapted to new environments. What changed was location. What remained was identity. This is why modern Pueblo cultures retain recognizable continuity. They are not remnants, they are continuation. New homes, familiar patterns in regions to the south and east, new pueblos emerged. They were built differently, reflecting new conditions. But core elements remained: kivas, plazas, alignment with the sun. These were not copies, they were evolutions, proof that culture moves even when stone stays behind. Silence as respect. One question often asked is, why no written record? Why no carved explanation? But writing was never central to Anasazi tradition. Knowledge lived in memory, song, and practice. Silence does not mean absence. It means trust that future generations would remember without needing walls to speak. When paths overlap, migration does not occur in isolation. As Anasazi groups moved, they encountered others. Sometimes they joined existing communities. Sometimes they formed new ones. These encounters reshaped identity without erasing it. Diversity increased. Resilience strengthened. Movement allowed culture to breathe. The land they left behind. What happens to a place after people leave? It does not become empty, it becomes quiet. Wind takes over maintenance. Rain becomes the storyteller. Cliff dwellings age slowly. Kivas fill with sand, and the land resumes its long memory. A journey without an ending. Migration in this context has no final destination. It is cyclical. The Anasazi did not disappear. They transformed their relationship with place. They chose motion over rigidity, adaptation over attachment, and in doing so, they ensured continuity. Standing between places at this moment in the story, the people are neither fully gone nor fully settled. They exist between chapters, carrying the past forward, leaving nothing behind that needed to be destroyed. And so, as paths stretched across the desert, marked by memory rather than stone, the journey continued quietly, faithfully, and without regret. A place that feels suspended standing beneath a cliff dwelling, one feels a curious stillness. The structures cling to stone walls, neither fully part of the earth below nor entirely removed from it. They exist in between. This alone invites reflection. Why build here in places that require ladders, precision, and patience? The answer is not fear, it is intention. Not fortresses, but shelters. For many years, cliff dwellings were interpreted as defensive strongholds, high walls, narrow access. But closer study reveals something gentler. There is little evidence of sustained warfare, no stockpiles of weapons, no signs of prolonged siege. Instead, these dwellings offer protection from climate, not from people. They shield from summer heat, from winter wind, from sudden rain. The cliff provides what the open mesa cannot. Architecture that listens. The Anasazi did not carve the cliffs. They selected natural alcoves, spaces already shaped by erosion. Then they built within them. Stone was gathered locally, mortar mixed from earth itself. Walls followed the curve of the rock, rooms adapted to the space given. This was architecture that listened, that responded. It is difficult to see where nature ends and human intention begins. Community in vertical space life in a cliff dwelling required cooperation. Ladders connected levels. Rooms opened into shared spaces. Movement was communal. Privacy existed, but was balanced by closeness. Children learned to climb early. Elders taught from shaded doorways. Voices carried gently, never echoing harshly. This was not isolation. It was togetherness shaped by stone. Seasonal living cliff dwellings were not always permanent. Many were occupied seasonally. People moved between mesa-top fields and canyon shelters as conditions required. This mobility reflects flexibility, not instability. The Anasazi understood that different places offer different gifts. The cliff was one chapter, not the entire story. The final occupations. By the mid to late 1200s, some of the most famous cliff dwellings were built, right as migration accelerated. This timing puzzles many. Why invest in complex construction if departure was imminent? Perhaps because these places were meant as transitions, shelters during change, spaces for ceremony and gathering as decisions unfolded. They were not endpoints. They were thresholds, evidence of peaceful departure. Inside many cliff dwellings, objects remain. Pottery fragments, tools, seeds, but what is absent is just as important. There are no signs of chaos, no hurried abandonment. Everything suggests preparation, as if the people knew they would not return and accepted it. Silence after departure. Once the dwellings were empty, nature resumed her role. Dust settled, birds nested, rain softened mortar without breaking it. The silence that followed was not sudden. It grew slowly, like dusk. Modern reflections today, these dwellings feel intimate. They are not grand monuments. They invite quiet observation. Visitors often speak in whispers without being told. Something about the space encourages respect. Perhaps because the homes were never meant to impress. They were meant to belong. A memory held in stone, the cliff dwellings remain because they were built with humility. They did not challenge the land, they cooperated with it. And so the land kept them, not as relics of failure, but as reminders of balance. Between departure and continuation, these homes mark a moment when the Anasazi stood between staying and leaving. They represent care, even in transition. And so, as the last ladder was lifted and the final doorway sealed, the cliffs held their memory gently, watching, waiting, and remaining. Memory that does not sleep, history does not always live in stone. Sometimes it lives in voices, carried gently across generations, spoken at the right time to those prepared to listen. While the Anasazi left their homes behind, they did not leave their story behind. It continued not as ruins, but as memory. Names and meaning. The word Anasazi itself comes from the Navajo language, often translated as ancient enemies or ancient ones. But modern Pueblo peoples prefer a different understanding. They speak of themselves not as replacements, but as descendants. They do not say the Anasazi vanished. They say, we moved. This difference matters, because it shifts the story from disappearance to continuation. Emergence and migration stories across Pueblo traditions, a shared theme appears. Humanity emerges into the world, then travels across it, learning, correcting, balancing. Settlements are temporary lessons. Movement is essential. These stories do not glorify permanence. They value harmony. When a place becomes imbalanced, the people are meant to move not in fear, but in understanding. The Anasazi migrations fit seamlessly within this worldview. Sacred sites still spoken of. Many ancient Anasazi sites remain sacred today. Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, Canyon de Chelly. These are not ruins to Pueblo peoples. They are ancestral places. Some are visited quietly. Others are left untouched. Knowledge about them is not shared publicly, not out of secrecy, but out of respect. The past is not owned. It is honored. Continuity in practice. Ceremonies performed today often echo ancient rhythms. Kivas remain central. Plazas host seasonal rituals. Songs are sung that mark planting, rain, harvest. These are not reenactments. They are living practices. The architecture changed. The geography shifted, but the heart endured. Why silence was chosen. Western history often expects documentation, dates, names, explanations, but Pueblo traditions value context over record. Some knowledge is meant to be lived, not written. Silence protects meaning. If the Anasazi had left a carved explanation on stone, it might have frozen their story. Instead, it remained flexible, able to adapt, to breathe. The outsiders question. Archaeologists ask, why did they leave? Pueblo descendants ask, why wouldn't they? From this perspective, leaving when balance is lost is wisdom. Staying too long is the greater danger. This does not diminish the mystery. It reframes it. The responsibility of remembering. For Pueblo peoples, ancestral memory carries responsibility. To live well, to maintain balance, to respect land and season. The story of the Anasazi is not a cautionary tale of failure. It is a lesson in adaptability, in humility. When past and present meet, standing today among cliff dwellings, one is not alone. The silence is shared. The stones are not abandoned. They are resting. And the people, their descendants, continue elsewhere, walking the same principles in new places. A story still unfolding. The Anasazi story does not end in absence. It continues in breath, in song, in careful living. And perhaps the greatest mystery is not where they went, but how well they understood when to go. A gentle turning as this part of the journey closes, we stand between past and present, the ruins behind us, the living cultures beside us, and ahead, a final reflection. Because understanding the Anasazi is not about solving a puzzle. It is about listening to a way of thinking that still speaks softly today. And so, as the voices of the ancestors settled into living memory, the story remained not finished but continuing. Returning to the beginning, the desert looks the same at the end of the journey as it did at the beginning. The cliffs still hold the light just before sunset. The wind still moves patiently through canyons and stone. Nothing announces completion. And perhaps that is fitting, because the story of the Anasazi was never meant to arrive at a sharp ending. It was meant to circle back to understanding. A civilization that did not fail so often, ancient stories are framed through collapse. Empires rise, they fall, but the Anasazi do not fit comfortably into that shape. There is no evidence of chaos, no final catastrophe, no desperate last stand. Instead, there is choice. A decision made slowly with attention, guided by observation rather than panic. They recognized change and responded. This is not failure, it is intelligence. Permanence was never the goal the Anasazi built in stone, but they did not worship stone. Their architecture was careful, yet never arrogant. They did not carve mountains into monuments. They did not demand the land remain unchanged. They built knowing that someday others might leave these places behind. And they accepted that truth without fear. The wisdom of letting go. There is a quiet courage in leaving something well made, in understanding that beauty does not require permanence. The Anasazi show us that legacy is not measured by how long structures stand, but by how gently people move through time. What the silence teaches, the empty dwellings speak without words. They do not accuse, they do not warn, they simply remain. And in their remaining, they invite reflection. They ask us to consider our relationship with land, with growth, with change. They remind us that listening is as important as building. Mystery without fear, the unanswered questions surrounding the Anasazi are not gaps to be filled. They are spaces to be respected. Not every story needs a conclusion written in certainty. Some are meant to stay open so that curiosity remains gentle, not aggressive. The mystery here is calm. It does not disturb sleep, it deepens it. Walking with the past, to walk among these ancient places is to walk beside people who understood something we often forget. That survival is not about control. It is about alignment with land, with season, with one another. A reflection for our time in an age of urgency, the Anasazi offer another rhythm: slow observation, measured response, thoughtful movement. They did not wait until disaster forced their hand. They acted when balance shifted, and by doing so, they preserved what mattered most. The story continues quietly. The descendants of the Anasazi still live in the Southwest today. Their ceremonies continue. Their languages endure. Their relationship with the land remains active. The story was never lost. It simply changed location. Sitting with the fire, imagine now the fire burning low. The desert night cool, stars steady overhead. There is no need to reach for explanation, only to sit with what has been shared. A gentle ending, and so, as the echoes of the ancient world soften into the quiet passage of time, the stone homes rest, the roads wait, and the land continues its patient listening. The Anasazi did not vanish. They moved, leaving behind a lesson written not in words, but in balance. Thus, the mystery rests once more beneath the open sky, not demanding answers, only inviting wonder. And in that stillness, the journey ends calm, complete, and quietly alive.